Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, host and executive producer of Riprap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Pamela, and we're going to talk about her books on improvisation. How did you get involved with this? How did this start up as your moment, your initiative?
Part of it was a passion. Of course, everything starts from that passion. When I was a child, I used to practice my piano repertoire and my violin and singing and then the organ, which I started a little bit after the other instruments. I would practice my repertoire, but I wanted to keep playing or keep singing. And so what I would do is play right next to the piano. My parents had an LP stereo system, and so I would just put one of the LPs on the stereo system and listen to a track on that, and then go to the piano and see if I could figure out how that harmony and that melody was conceived. And I would just go back and forth, play that same track over until I figured it out. And then once I figured it out, I wanted to see if I could do more with it. So it was just kind of a personal challenge, and I mean, I always liked puzzles and games when I was a kid, and it was my own musical game, and I just did it for my own enjoyment. I didn't really no one was teaching me that because most teachers just taught repertoire. So I did that throughout my childhood, and it was wonderful. I mean, it was my happiest moments were just spent trying to figure out how does that work and what else can I do with that.
One of the themes in this book and in conversation is the instrument. And it varies, whether it's an organ or harpsichord or clavichord or piano, you know. And I'm fascinated with your insights in this because you've played all of them, and you've worked with them.
Yes, one of my dear friends who was also working in Sweden was studying the clavichord and went to research in Leipzig in various places, historical music instrument museums, how the early clavichords were built. It turns out that was Bach's preferred keyboard instrument because it teaches so much about technique. And so what I did in Sweden is I developed classes of improvisation on the clavichord. So they were learning how the soundest keyboard technique, because the clavichord demands it. It doesn't sound good. It sounds
Don't
like
have any much
sizzling bacon if you don't use the proper arm weight, if the ergonomics of the bone position really of the arm are not in perfect alignment with the keys that you're playing. The sound will really let you know that the technique is not optimal. And so I thought, rather than try to work with students on teaching them how to have this optimal technique while they have this visual aspect of the music in front of them, erase the visual part so that their aural synapses are all the more open, and they're just improvising. They're learning little patterns with which to improvise, and at the same time perfecting their technique and responding to the instrument with what they're doing. This is the unfortunate thing about training that is only repertoire based, that the people who are wed only to the score in front of them tend to become very visually oriented at the expense of some of the aural perception. And so, I mean, of course there are brilliant repertoire players. There are, millions of them, and people who work very hard for that. But I really find if people have studied improvisation and have taken the time to learn technique on a very specific instrument like the clavichord, their playing will breathe more. It will sound more human. It will have a much broader palette of affect and much more depth in terms of communication and perception of how harmony works and how melody works and how all of this is woven together in the most optimal music making.
Well, it can respond, the player can respond to the music.
That's the key word, John. Responding to the music, responding to the instrument, rather than imposing an idea of this is how this has to be played, or this is how my technique works, I'm going to put that on any instrument. each instrument has a different character when you're a keyboardist. I mean, a trumpeter can carry his or her own instrument around, so they know their instrument intimately. But when you're a keyboardist, you have to be prepared to respond to each new nuance of each new instrument. And the art of improvisation. I've been asked this by colleagues, why Bach? Bach is so difficult, Bach is so complex. But there are a few reasons for that. First of all, when a student will go to a music conservatory or university training, their music theory classes that they begin as freshmen and continue then for multiple years generally start for at least the first 3 semesters with 18th century melody and harmony. It's considered the foundational work for the 19th, 20th, 21st century music. And that study culminates with Bach. Most music students are asked to be able to analyze a chorale of Bach. A chorale is a piece in miniature. It can fit on one page, but the harmony is complex, it's sophisticated, it moves smoothly from one key to another, which is not easy to do if you don't know the secrets of how to do it. I mean, it's a very studied art. And encapsulated in a Bach chorale is everything an improviser really needs to know. So I have taken then Bach chorales, you have a beautiful melody and you have a strong bass line underlying it, so those outer voices are key. And I've taken those as the starting point and really the ending point for developing an improvisation pedagogy method that's based musicologically on historic sources, reports from Bach's pupils about how Bach improvised and how he taught his pupils to improvise. So that addresses today's practice of how students are taught music theory. The other thing is, if one wants to improvise, if it's possible for them to learn how to improvise in an 18th century style, then any pattern language of harmony will be accessible to them. Because Bach's harmony changes on the quarter or even eighth note in his chorales. In 19th century music, the music expanded. You know that the symphonies get longer and longer the later the composer's date is. They're expanded in terms of time, but the harmony isn't as compact. It's stretched out, so the same harmony will be treated for a half a page versus one chord, one quarter note. And the tertial harmony, the harmony that's stacked in thirds at the time of Bach, those thirds were stacked up even more in the 19th century. So Bach used 7th chords, but then they started using 9th, 11th, 13th chords. So it was expanded horizontally, it was expanded vertically, but the basic premise is still there. And if a person can learn how to improvise in miniature, they're going to be much more successful in the symphonic style that's an expansive style.
We should talk a little bit about this wonderful series you have called The Muse, which I find fascinating in itself, because how do you define muse?
Muse, I love the word because it can mean many things. It's, of course, has the traditional Greek goddess of inspiration for an artist or a musician, poet. And that source of inspiration is really important, and it comes in various forms of support, I think, for any artist. But muse also means to ponder, to have the childlike ability to study the wings on a ladybug and not be pressed by the clock or needing to be somewhere or having a final goal, but much more enthralled with the journey, with each step along the way. And again, it's a mindset that children have, but that is taught out of them somehow with deadlines and due dates and requirements and that kind of thing. So I'm trying to reclaim it as an adult. And the other thing is, with all the improvisation teaching that I've done, I have found that even though there are many, many adults who would like to learn improvisation and can learn it and can perform it well, or learn how to play improvisation for themselves, for their own satisfaction of learning more about how music works. There inevitably is a fear factor that enters into learning improvisation when one already is very proficient at playing repertoire on an instrument, because there's this expectation that, I should be able to improvise at the same level that I play repertoire. But of course, no one has practiced improvisation as much as they have practiced repertoire in today's age. And it just takes the same level of practice. It's just putting in those hours of inquiry and being able to have a beginner's mind, and I wonder how this works, instead of, I didn't like how that sounded. Instead of the judge mode, go to the right hemisphere of the brain, where it's the curious, the imaginative side. And I thought, what better place to start than with children? So I had started composing songs for children over a decade ago, and just over the years with my own children would sing it to them to teach them various concepts about how language arts worked, or parts of speech, or science activities like how do volcanoes emerge, or what are the layers of the earth, and creating songs about that as I pushed them on the swings in the playground. And they would have these fun activities that involved a lot of movement and music at the same time, so they were learning. And then I thought, for people to really embrace improvisation, they need to start when they're children and have it completely infused into their music making. That was one of my goals with Muse. And the other, a couple of the other ones are to keep music in the schools. Music is critical. It's not an appendage that can be lopped off. It's considered maybe as a special or as an enhancement or something, but it's really integral. And historically, from early, again, the Greek times and before the Common Era already, it was documented that the power of music was able to convince people of certain concepts of religious beliefs, or of the need to go to war or to make peace, or how to celebrate. The power of music helped students retain concepts. And this is what we need to keep and to promote and to enhance, to grow in the schools. We really need more music. And so I composed pieces that teach academic concepts through music. So there's songs that have the academics embed into them. So these songs about the language arts and the math, cycles of time, and science are in my Muse at school. I have a volume called Muse in Peace, and that volume teaches children how to discover peace within. I studied a fair amount of psychology, and one of the techniques for calming people who have experienced trauma. For instance, Vietnam War veterans had PTSD, and one of the techniques that was developed and proven successful to work with victims of trauma, rape victims, and any kind of trauma that people encounter, was EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And this involves either a tapping back and forth, left to right. It can involve a visual cue to make the eyes move back and forth, right to left. It can be some sort of buzzing mechanism that would be placed on the shoulders or back or anywhere. And what it does is it helps a person move from the amygdala, this fight or flight portion of the brain, into the prefrontal cortex, where the information that has transpired, the trauma that has transpired, can be processed in more in language, verbal language, to talk about what happened, and then how to strategize, how to deal with what happened in a more rational, logical, but also creative way. So I wanted children to be equipped with that, to find inner peace. So I wrote the song, I'm going to tap peace in my soul, soul. I'm going to tap peace in my soul, soul. And I tried it out on classroom after classroom. And I was often given classes who were just coming in from recess, and preschool students, elementary students, and adults even. And I've tried it on children who are coming in and wild and excited and revved up from their time outside. And we sit in a circle and we sing our tapping song. And it's amazing. Their breathing slows, their eyebrows lower, their jaw becomes relaxed, their shoulders relax, they have a deeper inhalation, a more proper singing inhalation, and then we start singing together and they're calm. So they're building strategies for how to calm themselves. Then this book, Muse and Peace, develops. I have many songs about peace and how to find inner peace, historical examples of how music was used as music therapy, David playing his harp for King Saul, the really first example of music therapy. But I also have then songs about people who have made the world a more peaceful, just place. So there's a song about Wangari Maathai, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for starting the Greenbelt movement in Kenya, a movement that spread to 30 countries in Africa and helped stop famine and empower women to work and get paid for their work and feed countless hundreds of thousands of people. She was an amazing, humble figure who started by planting a seedling and empowering other women to do the same. I have a song about MLK Jr., about Mahatma Gandhi, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, figures in the world who have given a vision and have done work to make the world a better place so that children can be inspired to know they can do that too.
Well, and at this moment, we just had the Paris attack,
Yes.
and one of the commentators was saying, we don't know what the effect is on the children
Oh, and the children,
who've seen this.
right.
So maybe this is the kind of thing that could give them, I mean, they need to have relief.
They
They
do.
need to have some way of sorting out how to
They do.
live in this mess,
They do. They need to know there's a safe place in the world for them.
you know.
And one of the ways,
You know,
they can implant this in their souls is
you're talking about
music.
PTSD, and I know from other research and reading I've done, people with PTSD, it's the same thing for any brain injury. That in a confrontation, it goes to a part of the brain that has been injured,
yes,
and they overreact.
yes,
So if there's a way to bring them back to a rational, thing, then they can find peace. But otherwise, I mean, I've had students who coming back from Afghanistan, Iraq, who have PTSD, and if they get in a confrontation, they're a mess,
yes, yeah.
and they know it, and they suffer a lot.
Oh, it's hugely painful. I mean, it's emotionally painful as well as physically, and it's really a matter of building a system of support, but also a set of strategies.
It's also a way for music is integral to our
Again.
existence.
It is. It is.
You also had the music for the soul.
Muse for the soul, yes. So that gets at soul care in the way that Muse in Peace gets at sort of mind and body care. And Muse for the Soul I intended this, it has sacred texts, but I intended to be open for multiple faith traditions. So there's a large emphasis on psalms, which are shared by multiple faith traditions, and the concept of psalms. So I wrote a psalm for children where it's, make a joyful noise unto the Lord, make a joyful noise so they can sing that. But then, make a cry noise unto the Lord. Make a cry noise. Make an angry noise unto the Lord. Stomp, stomp. And they come up with their own actions that go with that. But so that they know that it's okay to express themselves, that God can handle any expression that they bring to God. What God wants is a relationship. And that it also teaches them how to find their voice and how to learn how to ask for help. So there is some work in this about having positive self-perception versus negative self-perception. And how does one deal with negative self-perception to move toward a positive self-perception, especially when one has been traumatized or hurt in various ways, abused by adults or by people they thought they could trust. So soul care has elements of that. There are Bible stories because many of these stories, whether people are religious or not, have some sort of message to them. David and Goliath, for instance, or the idea of the Exodus. Of course, this is an important commemoration for Judaism and the Jewish faith, and it's something that's important, I think, to recount, to retell. This is part of the Hebrew tradition, is to keep telling the story so that atrocities such as the Holocaust that have occurred will not recur. And steeping children into the integrity of having a moral compass that can be developed again through story and through song. And so then I also, for those who would like to use it in context of church or liturgy in Christian traditions, there are songs that teach children about how the liturgical year functions. What time is it in the church year? What color will we see today? It's Pentecost in the church year, and green is the color we will see today. And that's for every season of the church year. Why is it that color? And then the song goes on to explain, okay, what is Pentecost, and what are the colors, and why are they chosen, and what happened then? So again, it's asking questions to evoke curiosity in the minds of children about, oh yeah, why do I see green up on the altar and the banners in front and the stoles of the clergy or the alms? And then I have some liturgical events as well, some liturgical theater that can be used in church school classrooms, or it can be used as parts of services. I'm trying to feature Mary and Elizabeth to celebrate women in the scriptural tradition as well, because there have been a lot of patriarchal traditions that haven't named the women, so I have Mary and Elizabeth named in there, as well as St. Francis, who was a great friend of animals and of children. Children, I think, take to St. Francis as a hero of sorts because of his simple life and his care for all creatures.
I thought it was interesting that you approach this also as a teacher, so you're looking at the different levels, age levels, of the people who might be involved with these books,
Yes.
and detail the aspects of those levels.
Yes.
And that's helpful to know your student,
Yes, it is, and I'm finding that adults are responding to it as well. I mean, it's a way for adults who weren't brought up in a certain faith tradition to learn more, or to develop strategies in their parenting, their own teaching, maybe their career that's even in the business field or something where they have to interact with colleagues and understand different ways of thinking.
Then there is this bigger one on work.
Use at work.
And I'm not exactly sure. It seemed like there was more of this technical stuff. And
Use at work
yeah.
is intended to teach how music works.
I see.
And this I'm using with some of my adult students as well. Adult students who haven't had traditional music training. And it's teaching music through song. My brother is a Shakespeare scholar and professor, and of course, in his field, they have studied the incredible craft of language with Shakespeare, and they work themselves to wordsmith their response to Shakespeare or their new insights on Shakespeare. But they're using language to analyze language. And so he has challenged me before. He said, "You're in the field of music. Why do musicians try to use language exclusively in their criticism, in their teaching, in their studies of music? Why don't they try to use their own medium to respond and teach music?" So I took that on as a challenge.
So it is a challenge?
I'm teaching music through song, and so they're F-A-C-E are the spaces that I see. F-A-C-E, what does it spell? F-A-C-E, that spells face, which rhymes with space. F-A-C-E are the spaces on the staff. So through song, they're learning how to read notes. And I have the same thing for lines on the staff, and what do clefs tell us? How does rhythm work? How does meter work? So I have songs about poetic meter, and about modes, and what are the characters of each mode. Ionian pillars, stately like the old Greek pillars, standing tall. And so the Ionian mode is the same as the major mode. Ionian pillars are very strong and stately. So I'm comparing the two through song and teaching the modes. They're singing the modes, hearing the modes, at the same time they're learning how do these modes, what are the characteristics of these modes.
That's a perfect example of what the issues are of knowing how to do something but then teaching it. And the people you're teaching may not have the vocabulary to be able to do it themselves.
Yes.
And so then you have to teach them the vocabulary, all the components of it.
That's right.
And they'd be starting from zero,
Yes.
or very little.
I've also mentioned earlier the visual aspect of musicianship, and because language is such a strong component in music making, or in music criticism and music study, I feel as if the oral aspect of musicianship has been neglected, and the oral aspect is critical. I mean, it's really the most important sense for musicians, and yet the visual aspect is trained the most highly. So I have exercises in there of how to listen, and how to listen very keenly, how to just spend hours outside and absorb what sounds are occurring. When you go on a trip, pay attention to what are those sounds, and then how to describe those sounds. Let's say you had to describe those sounds to someone who was deaf. Then you could use images and metaphors from the other senses. You could talk about the texture, and is it rough or smooth? You could talk about how it would taste if this was a food. You could talk about the colors or the visual outline of something if someone were deaf. But what if someone was deaf and blind? Then how would you describe it? What if someone had never heard music before and never will have a chance to? We need to have a much broader, deeper vocabulary for sound and for listening. I mean, I think we'll become better listeners just in human communication as well if we can take time to just be quiet and listen.
To listen. Well, thank you for being on Riprap.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure for me. It was a fascinating books that I read and extended my knowledge of music. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you, Karen.